I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I am your host, David Agranoff, returning with, and listen, before we get into everything, I gotta talk about some upcoming shows, because if you just see the two episodes that are back to back, you'd think that I switched over to becoming a World War II movie podcast, which this podcast is not. So we've got some episodes coming up that my science fiction listeners should pay really close attention to. Okay, and one of them I'm going to promote pretty deeply, but we will have, instead of doing the Bad Batch with my Star Wars Nerd Out panel, we're going to do Bad Batch and Mandalorian Season 3 together. You guys watch Bad Batch at all, Dino and even?
I have not yet, no.
I watch it all, dude.
Okay,
big time Star Wars fan.
So
if you ever need someone else on these panels.
Yeah, well, Dino, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
We are. Did want to do one on Bad Batch, because I don't want to I don't want anyone to think I think less of the cartoons, and because I'm a huge Rebels fan, which I'm currently rewatching, for reasons that should be obvious.
Yep.
But we're just going to try to combine the Star Wars, since Mando and Bad Batch are ending so close together. And so we're going to be doing that. And then in 2 weeks, of course, we're going to have our panel for the season 3 of Star Trek Picard. I'm going to have a special treat there too. I visited the Captain Janeway statue in my hometown in Bloomington, Indiana. And so I got some video of that is going to be going up. But the one that I want everyone to really cue into is that in May, I'm going to have a panel of super guests that are all like huge sci-fi nerds, because a huge debate broke out on Twitter when I said that this novel, Staying on Zanzibar by John Brunner, was the greatest science fiction novel of the 20th century. And then it turned into a debate of, was it even the greatest science fiction novel of 1968? And then a whole argument about the qualities of the year 1968 in science fiction broke out. And now we're going to do a whole podcast about the science fiction of 1968. So if you are wanting to participate, you have time, because it's going to be a couple weeks yet. We're going to read, we would need to read, this one's a thick one, Staying on Zanzibar. It's about 600 pages. But I think it's the best science fiction novel of the 20th century, so I highly recommend it. You also want to read Camp Concentration by Thomas Dish. You would also want to read Nova by Samuel R. Delany. And Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, of course. And you might want to read His Master's Voice by Stanislaw Lem, because these are the books that we are debating for this episode, and then we're going to rank them. So if you want to take part in this debate, you can read those books and come back and join us for that. Even or Dino, are either of you fans of any of these books from 1968?
Yeah, Noah's my favorite Delaney.
Nova's your favorite.
I've read Androids.
All right. So here's the thing, guys. 1968. People want to be a part of it. Join in the community. You have time to read those. So I'm not going to give away the whole panel yet, but it's some very vocal science fiction commentators.
Nice.
Excuse me. Now, this
Excellent.
episode is part two of the World War II mission movie breakdowns to promote the release of my novel, The Last Night to Kill Nazis, which comes out from Clash Books August 2023. So if you want to get on pre-ordering that, that's great. The other thing you can do to help me promote this book is if you have independent local stores, whatever, let the buyers know. We're getting a lot of orders from independent stores, so that's really helpful. And I, shout out to those stores that have already ordered it. But the more the merrier if people go in and talk to them. Libraries, if you have a librarian, let them know that you want a book about vampires killing Nazis, which is all the result of a glib statement by a member of our panel here today, but we'll talk about that later. That being said, the book is up for pre-order, so there you go. So the first episode, if you did not catch the first episode of this podcast series, I'm going to have revolving guests. And the last time was Devlin McCarthy and Judge Mark Rothenberg talking about the Guns of Navarone and Force 10 from Navarone, which are two of my favorite World War II mission movies. But probably my all-time favorite and one of the biggest influences on this book is Where Eagles Dare, starring Clint Eastwood, which we are going to talk about today. And one that I had never seen before, Kelly's Heroes. And so those are the ones we're going to be talking about today, because part of the idea was I wanted to do ones that I was influenced by, but I also wanted to check out some that I had never seen before. And I think next time, the next time with Judge Rothenberg and Devlin are ones that none of the three of us have seen ever. So, but we haven't entirely nailed that down yet, so we'll find out. So anyways, my panel today, starting with Dino. Dino, tell everybody who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into later like why I chose you for this podcast.
Oh, excellent. Hello, everybody. My name is Dino Parenti, and when I am not in front of a computer drafting buildings for an architectural firm, I am a writer of horror, sci-fi, crime, all the dark stuff. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here and discuss these two interesting films.
Which you had not seen either one of these before, right?
I thought I hadn't seen, but I know for sure I have not seen Kelly's Heroes. But as I was watching Where Eagles Dare, some childhood memories watching these things with my dad came to the forefront. I had seen it, but I'm glad I rewatched it.
Yeah. Eva, tell the folks who you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Ivan Zoric. When I'm not looking at payroll spreadsheets all day, I'm writing kind of same thing as Dino, a little bit of sci-fi, horror, all the dark stuff. And originally I'm from Yugoslavia. It kept getting smaller the longer I stayed in Portland. Now it's just Serbia, and I've been in Portland some 22 years now.
Yeah, so of course I had to have you on this episode because this was filmed in your neck of the woods.
And I will tell you, it was filmed about half an hour away from my house.
Yes, we will get into that, which is one of the reasons why you absolutely had to be on this episode. So, not that we didn't talk about Yugoslavia, obviously, in the last episode, because a lot of that was filmed there too. But now, gotta get the banta out of the way, in the room, the banta in the room. Excuse me. Even is so. This has been mentioned before on the podcast, but even is the reason why the book The Last Night to Kill Nazis exists, because he and I are both big Portland Trailblazer fans, and a lot of times when there's important games going on, we kind of jab back and forth, talk to each other about the Blazers. And one night we were after a game, we were talking about the Blazers, and I said, one of us said something about watching, there was a new movie on Netflix called Blood Red Sky, which is a hostage takeover movie with a vampire, right? And so during this conversation, I said, somehow I was like, well, I guess it's just kind of like Die Hard with a vampire, right? And then even said to me, kind of glibly, well, most movies would be better if you just add a vampire. And I had the thought, I started thinking of like 6 or 7 different kinds of movies with a vampire. And then when I thought of World War II mission movies with a vampire, the whole plot and the title came to me within about 30 seconds. And I was writing this book 2 weeks later, which is the fastest idea to writing a book that I have ever had, because I loved it so much. I wanted to see this book happen. So, even thank you. You're
Welcome.
acknowledged inside the actual covers of the book for doing that. And even and I go back to Portland. We used to shoot hoops together and talk. Like, we're the weird guys that can talk about sci-fi world building while we're shooting hoops. So, we had that going. But so now, Dino, you have a huge collection of World War II movies. What's your interest in this particular genre of film?
I would say, like most other people our age or in our age area, our dads sat us down with us in the living room. I was born in the early 70s. And my dad is Italian, and he is from there, and his father did apparently some shady stuff in the Italian government during World War II. And he just loved World War II movies and westerns. The westerns didn't stick with me at the time, but the World War II movies, just The Great Escape, and The Bridge on the River Kwai, just any of those long epic, multi-cast, starring films that just 3 hours of joy on the couch. It was some of my fondest memories as a kid. So it's stayed.
Right. And which is a similar story for me. My father loved these movies, and I remember watching Where Eagles Dare on an ABC movie. They must have started it at like 6 o'clock to get through the whole movie with commercials. But I do remember watching on that. My father was also just a huge Clint Eastwood fan, so we watched a lot of the westerns too, which obviously we got nods to the westerns in Kelly's Heroes. But it's interesting to note because Clint Eastwood was such a star because of the spaghetti westerns at the time. But for him, this is like early for him making Hollywood movies. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Even where's your interest in this genre come from?
It's the same story. So my dad was a huge World War II and Western fan, and movies back home used to come a little bit later, like 10 at night. So oftentimes he would wait till everybody's asleep in the house to kind of wake me up, and then we'll just sit down and just watch the movies together.
Yeah. Do you have a particular now? Starting with Even, do you have a particular favorite in this genre overall?
Well, Where Eagles Dare, that's one of my all-time favorites. And then there also used to be a show based on a Dirty Dozen, and I used to just love that show. And I don't know how long it ran because it was something that I watched as a kid, but I should probably like try to find it. But they actually ran it as a TV show.
Interesting. Like cutting together the movies with the sequels and like various episodes to make it like a long running show. Because I know in
Something
other
like that.
markets, like around the world, they would do shady shit like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Dino, do you have a personal favorite?
I mean, off the top of my head, Bridge on the River Kwai and Das Boot are sort of, to me, they will hold my interest isn't the right phrase, but the fact that they have a little more depth to them, and I can watch and enjoy not just technically, but also kind of philosophically what's going on. But in my heart of hearts, it's The Great Escape, because that I think is my dad's favorite too. So I have the fondest memories of just rewatching that movie since I was a kid.
Yeah, and people who listened to the last episode know Force 10 from Navarone is a huge one for me because I had it on Betamax and I watched it many times, and the Harrison Ford of it, and lots of different reasons, but I'm the one weirdo who likes Force 10 better than guns. But which is a hot take. I am aware, but it is mine. So we're gonna get into these two movies and a little background on like how they happened first, and then we'll talk. Just let you get into them. If you're a first time listener around here because you just were searching for these movies and you found this, thank you for making it this far. We are going to get into Where Eagles Dare and Kelly's Heroes now. Here's the thing. These movies started as now Alistair MacLean is a huge influence on my novel here, and there are tons of Easter eggs in this book for Alistair MacLean movies, novels, and such. I mean, I was not messing around. I mean, there's a character named Mallory in it, who's British, who works with the OSS. So I'm not even trying to hide it. So
Is there any mentions of zebras?
no,
Or stations out in the ice.
there is no ice station zebras, but there's some other things. There's a Marion Riverwood character in here, so I'm not messing around. I'm just like, hell, I'm just showing my love for everything. So but the thing about it is that if you want to find those things in this book, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, is to connect it to the genre itself, but also because I love the genre of World War II mission movies. And well, there was a little bit of a light shined on it when QT did Inglourious Bastards. And it was cool that movie existed, but it was a QT movie that had the first two chapters of Inglourious Bastards hints the World War II mission movie that it never really stays, right? And the rumor is that he wrote a 10-hour script in the 90s that followed the the mission parameters, and he thought about making a series for HBO at the time, but apparently wanted Adam Sandler to be in it, which is really interesting. But
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
God, I would love to read that script because the first two chapters of Inglourious Bastards, when it is a World War II mission movie, are the two best parts in my opinion. But that being said, so there is a whole, in the late 60s, early 70s, obviously starting in 1961 with Guns of Navarone, not really starting with, but since World War II, we've had all kinds of movies that fit this genre. So it's not just the Alistair MacLean, but Alistair MacLean was like the guy that wrote novels like this, wrote movies like this. And what makes Where Eagles Dare a little different is that he wrote the screenplay first for Where Eagles Dare. Guns of Navarone, Forrest 10 from Navarone, like Ice Station Zebra, all these things. Like, he was a novelist first, so he usually wrote novels. But what happened was, in this particular case, Richard Burton, the star, had a string of really shitty like box office disappointments, and he was drinking a lot, and he was going in the toilet basically with his career. He needed a big hit, and he wanted to do something like Guns of Navarone. So his people approached Alistair MacLean and said, do you have something? And he devised Where Eagles Dare as a film, which, if you look at the difference between Where Eagles Dare a little bit and the other ones, the visual of the action set pieces are much more in the forefront of Where Eagles Dare than most of the Alistair MacLean, being especially with the boxcar going up the mountain. So if you have not seen Where Eagles Dare, this is where we recommend that you pause this podcast, go watch it, come back. Or if you don't care, if you just want to hear us talk about it, you're a weirdo. You should see it. It is the body count of Where Eagles Dare is I think the thing that makes Where Eagles Dare stand out as a World War II mission movie, because Clint Eastwood kills a lot of Nazis. There are a lot of dead Nazis in this movie. Okay. And that is one of the things that really separates it, because a lot of the Alistair MacLean books are intrigue, and there's that here. but the body count is just off the rails. So, comparative. So, what's your history with seeing Where Eagles Dare? Starting with Dino, when you said you first saw it as a kid?
Yeah,
What do you think?
I remember specifically the cable cars
Yeah,
and action happening on top of them as I was watching it again, and it kicked back to the halcyon days of 11, 12-year-old me sitting on the couch watching this. I would not have remembered it because a lot of the core of it is the sort of the twist on why they're there and who they're looking for, and the
right.
way that's turned on its head, kind of, which was really, now I'm way more intrigued by it than I would have been at that time. I just would have loved the Clint Eastwood body count at the time.
Which is great.
It is
And
knives and guns.
yeah. We should also note Ingrid Pitt for the horror fans, who has a small role in the movie, but had actually escaped Nazism as a child. So she had a rough time with that. Ingrid Pitt is well known as being a Hammer um, horror star, and most famous for being in The Wicker Man, of course. Excuse me. So if anyone doesn't know, I just got over bronchitis. You're gonna hear it. Sorry. I'll do what I can to mute, but I am still getting over it just a bit. So Where Eagles Dare, even you saw this as a kid on TV in Yugoslavia, or
Yeah, black and white TV. Then
right?
rewatched it a few times in color. Oddly enough, I've rewatched it a few times, and this is kind of funny how it's going to tie in, but the whole modern like gaming industry and genre actually owes a lot to that movie, because one of the first and most famous first-person shooter games, well, two of them, Castle Wolfenstein and Spear of Destiny, borrowed directly from Eagles Dare. You
Yes.
have to infiltrate the Nazi castle, kill the Nazi soldiers, and then I watched it at that time back in the early 90s. But then again, like about 10 years ago or so, when they actually made Return to Castle Wolfenstein. And that game actually starts on the cable car. You are actually in the cable car, you're getting into the castle. So to me, it was just like, oh, let me just rewatch the movie so I can find the parallels. And then I just rewatched it again last night just to be ready for this.
Right. And I watched it in, I think I watched it when I was a kid, but I rewatched it in 2010 when this isn't the first time I've done a novel that was a tribute to World War II mission novels. Also from Clash Books, my novel Goddamn Killing Machines. And when I wrote Killing Machines in 2010, I read a bunch of the Alistair MacLean novels and watched a bunch of the movies, like trying to get into the headspace of what I wanted to do for writing that book in 2010. And I also rewatched a couple years ago. I rewatched it because for reasons, but there was some interest in Killing Machines as a another media project, and I rewatched Where Eagles Dare and discussion of that. And so I have watched it somewhat recently, but then of course I watched it Thursday night, gearing up for this. And man, does Where Eagles Dare hold up? Like, there's some things that are a little rough. By the way, Clint Eastwood and Richard Burton hated each other's guts, which I actually think is on screen. I think you can feel it.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely can.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you can
Yeah, I think
definitely.
the entire punk thing, I think that was probably just not
Right.
in the script.
Yeah, who knows?
The Eastwood
But
scowl was solidified.
I love that Clint Eastwood called the movie "Where Stunt Doubles Dare," which I thought was funny. And he had a horrible time making this movie because Richard Burton was constantly drunk, and Clint Eastwood is apparently a very intense professional about making movies, which would make sense because he went on to be a director and a very good director, right? And directed his own World War II movies, as a matter of fact. You know,
Yeah, I
years
think the
down.
rumors were that he was drinking like 4 bottles of vodka a day.
Yeah, some crazy amount Burton was drinking.
Burton.
And yeah. And I love this is totally besides the point, but I heard a Clint Eastwood story. So this is like eighth generation. But I was listening to Edgar Wright was on the Movies That Made Me, and he was telling a story about how he talked to somebody who directed Clint Eastwood in the 70s. And he said that anytime he tried to make a suggestion to Clint, he'd say, you know, I'm thinking we should. And Clint Eastwood would cut him off and say, move on to the next shot and get our asses in gear. It was like, he didn't want to hear it. Which, by the way, you know, a lot of his movies supposedly he does like 2-3 takes and then he's like done. No,
Yeah.
You have to be ready. You have to go. And who knows? It could be because of Where Eagles Dare, because of experiences like this, where and he by the way, you might think since both of these movies were directed by the same guy, Brian Hutton, that Clint Eastwood liked working with him enough that he worked with him 2 years later. Well, that's not the case either, because the Kelly's Hero was supposed to be directed by Don Siegel, who is Clint Eastwood's pal, who directed him in Dirty Harry and lots of movies. And Don Siegel had to drop out at the last minute from Kelly's Heroes, but Clint Eastwood had already signed. So it's not that Clint Eastwood was like, hey, I really want to work with this guy again. Now, that being said, I think the direction is fine. You got a feel for the guy that he's dealing with Clint Eastwood's personality and drunk Richard Burton, right? Richard Burton was also a noted socialist and not very pro-war, and really just didn't give a shit about the concept of the movie, just needed a hit. And so he may have been drinking a lot to just like put out of his mind that he was making this movie where he was killing tons of Nazis and whatever. So whatever, Richard Burton was a piece of work apparently making this.
I really wish I'd known this before I watched it again.
Well, yeah, now you got a reason to go back and
No,
watch it.
right, exactly.
Now
Yeah,
I
I
knew
think-
this going in this time. So I was kind of looking for it. And you know, it's hard to tell if Clint Eastwood looks more pissed than normal because he always
Right.
looks, you know,
Yeah, the one thing that I read about it is that he read the script originally and hated it, and
Yeah.
said there was just too much exposition. So he asked that half of his dialogue just gets cut off. So they just gave it back to Richard Burton.
Right. And so you can see there's a lot of, you know, Clint Eastwood really did not want to talk a lot in this
No.
movie. Yeah.
Right.
And apparently, yes, I read the same thing, that there was a lot of Clint Eastwood saying, why do you need to say this? You don't need to say this.
Mhm.
We already said
Yeah.
this. And the thing is that, you know, Clint Eastwood, there's a lot of problems with Clint Eastwood. I'm not saying, you know, whatever, but he knows what the hell he's doing making a movie, and he's a very smart storyteller.
Right.
He knows what he's doing,
Mhm.
right? And but one thing that we also know about him is that the script is like a god on his films. He does not mess with the script once you're on the set. So all these things, these discussions that he must have had with about doing the dialogue would have had to have been before he got on the set, because he is a firm believer, you know. And it's really interesting too, especially a couple years ago, I read the script for The Unforgiven, because I was told that it's like one of the best scripts ever, like just as a screenplay, that it's one of the most incredible screenplays, and it is amazing, and it is exactly the movie that, you know, even though the script sat around for like 15 years before they made Unforgiven, because he wasn't old enough to do it.
Yeah.
And Clint Eastwood held on to it. So one thing that's interesting is David Peebles got the job to write Blade Runner from the Unforgiven script, just to show you how long that script was sitting around.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting. But anyways, so Where Eagles Dare has this it is interesting because you can tell in certain ways that it was developed as a story for the screen, You know, obviously with the set pieces and all that. However, Alistair McLean, I think also one of the reasons why you can tell that is Alistair McLean's not a screenwriter. He's a novelist. And he tried to put way too much into the script. You know, it's really talky. In the scenes where, you know, and Clint Eastwood was totally right. You could cut a lot. As much as I love the movie, you could have cut a lot. You could have cut entire scenes. You could have gotten to the mountain a lot quicker. You could have, you know, it's not perfect. But the thing is, the things that work for the movie are so fucking good that it's okay. You know, it's like, for me, for example, like, yeah, there's a lot I don't like about Return of the Jedi. But the end product is pretty darn good. I'm gonna forgive you an Ewok or two. Okay. I'm gonna forgive you. And so for Where Eagles Dare, I'm gonna forgive you a scene in the bar early on that you really don't need. That's like, you know, did they need to get captured 3 times and escape? No. They could have just got, yeah, I get it. Is they're showing how resourceful they are and all that. But anyways, so even seeing this, watching this last night, how was it different for you watching it after all these years with knowing more what you do about storytelling and everything like that?
You know, the thing that you forget watching it as a kid and, you know, later on is how many twists are in the movie actually. You know, because you kind of remember, like, the first thing that you remember always is just the Nazi body count, right? It's like, oh yeah. And you remember the castle, you remember the atmosphere, but you kind of forget, you know, how many, especially that scene, which again, it was a little bit too long. The scene where they're actually sitting down and having that discussion about who the spy is, and then, like, all the twists and turns were pretty much just done by Burton. Everybody else was just kind of sitting there asking questions. One thing that,
Where he tricks them into giving the names of
yeah.
Yeah.
One thing
The
that I'll
actual
say
spies.
is, watching it now, I honestly think that the character of the Gestapo officer was just wasted in the movie. Didn't really serve any purpose and kind of goes out without doing anything. I feel like they
Are you
could
talking
have.
about the one that ends up with Mary?
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that
I-
was another side plot that was just kind of,
just fizzled out.
yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of forgot that, and now that I watched it last night, I was just like, huh, this guy could have been used so much better, especially being
He could have
Gestapo.
been actually scary. Like if you
Yeah,
think about a Christoph Waltz
Yeah.
type, yeah.
One
exactly.
wonders how he ended up, or if he ended up at all in the novel version.
Well, the novel version has a lot less dead Nazis. I will tell you, I now I read it 10 years ago, so and it's funny because I remember it being a little bit more um on the trickery, like, you know, that's it's less about like tricking their way out and less about shooting their way out. So
I bring it up because it felt like there was maybe a scene missing with the Gestapo guy that maybe was going to be part of the novel, and they just never got around to shooting it, and they just
Right.
used
Yeah.
him as the guy's going to hold a gun on them at the end and get the truth out.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that the Gestapo guy is kind of bad casting. He wasn't intimidating at all. He didn't. He
No,
just kind of
Oh,
came off as a dork.
he
yeah.
just looked like a cherub.
Yeah, he looked like
Yeah,
a real uncanny valley thing about him.
yeah, and uh, so I would say, you know, well, yeah, it's interesting that you say that, even because I do think that he is kind of a weak link in it. And that's one of the things, is that I definitely saw the flaws in this movie. But like I said, I mean, there's flaws, but it's the overall movie is so great that you're gonna put up with all of them.
Right.
It could
Yeah.
now. Here's one thing that's kind of blasphemy, but because it would be hard to outdo Clint Eastwood in casting, but this is a movie that could be remade with like a tighter script and better special effects.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
could make a better Where Eagles Dare. You could tighten it up. It would have to be in the right hands of the right director.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Agree with that.
Yeah. Dino, this is your first time really seeing it, so like give me your first like overall thoughts of like coming, like halfway through, what were you thinking, for example? Like,
Well, right off the top, it was one of these team movies where you get 4 minutes of the team devising the plan, and that's usually a scene that has a little more gravity to it in a lot of these movies. And it's like, bam, we're jumping out of the plane. I actually, as you said, yeah, there's flaws in it, but I liked it more than I didn't like it, like quite a lot. And a lot of it is the intrigue and the way they resolved the sort of the mystery. And it's like Burton, Burton's character knows everything and he kind of hints to things. And I thought they breadcrumbed it pretty nicely. Um, to the extent that I was surprised, even when after you find out that the guy's not really, I think it was the colonel that they're rescuing, but just a actor, just a grunt soldier as an actor. Um, that he even doesn't know what's going on, and that Burton had the wool over everyone's eyes the whole time. That by the end of the movie, I wasn't even sure if he wasn't still a double agent or a
right.
triple agent.
I'm going to jump into and just ask a question that just dawned on me. But do you think that Shane Black had that in mind when he was writing the Mandarin in Iron Man 3?
Yeah, it's
Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure that movie's in his DNA. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because this idea that that they go through all this to rescue this guy, but it's really not to rescue this guy.
No.
That is a great twist,
Yes.
because once you get there, you're all invested on, and the idea that Clint Eastwood's character wouldn't even know, that Schaefer wouldn't even hey, I remembered his name.
Right.
That Schaefer didn't even know that, and I love the idea that he says, hey, next time, why don't you Brits do it on your own?
Yeah. Right.
I just love the idea of the guy's motivations. It's just like, why is he doing that? Because that's the greatest acting role he can ever pull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
You
so
mean the colonel?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's
yeah.
just like, how are you
That
going to
is a
talk the guy into being
risky as
tortured by
hell.
Nazis?
Yeah, that's a risky as hell role to get your name out there. Yeah, but it's also part of a secret mission, so it's not like you can even probably show it to anybody
Right.
as a real, like, look, hey, look what I did.
well, once
Mhm.
you got your Purple Heart and the war is over and all
Yeah.
that, you could be like, I was so good,
He'd be like
I got,
Christopher Lee.
yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
I got tortured, and I helped. It was funny because it's such an Alistair McLean twist too, because he always, like, for example, Mallory and Guns of Navarone has the fake plan. So
Mhm.
in the Alistair McLean books, there's a lot of like, I'm going to insert this fake plan in there, which actually, in a lot of ways, as a PKD guy who's kind of loves stories that play with what is reality, the kind of twist in there that there's this guy heavy deep inside, like trying to manipulate what everyone sees as the reality inside the situation in the war, is really an interesting twist. And for those of you who are interested in seeing PKD play with that, I suggest Time Out of Joint. Uh is a novel that did specifically that. And so here's the thing. I think that that's a great and interesting part of this, and that it does really add something to it. But what I really find is that also the action scenes work in this movie. Whereas, for example, like when they barricade, when they're in the boxcar, like as soon as they got into the boxcar thing, and I was like, well, dude, they could just come and turn it off. Right.
Mhm.
And then and when Clint Eastwood goes and he puts up all the things and they're like trying to break down the doors, like each time the door goes, and they're getting closer, like
Yeah.
I'm feeling it, like, let's go, come on, we
Yeah.
got to get out of here. And the fact that they had, for each step of the way, they have a plan for, like, well, we're gonna jump out into the river,
Mhm.
we're gonna bust out the light, so they, it's almost ridiculous how well it's planned, but fine. And then,
almost
of course,
never-ending supply of those little cool self-contained dynamite explosives with the
Yeah,
strapping
I
it's a
on the
lot of fucking
left.
dynamite.
Those are
dedication to
great.
tripwire.
Yeah, it comes with a little tripwire, a timer,
Yeah.
everything. They just kept pulling them out of the bags.
Yeah, and that was kind of funny. Again, if you do a remake, maybe you'd try to make that a little bit more realistic. I don't know, maybe. But I love the bus. I love the bus with and that they have all like the traps set up along the road.
Mhm.
They blow up
that
the
was great.
bridge. Like the plan is just is really great. And then I think one of the things that makes the movie work is that even when they're doing all these things, that there's still like there's more Nazis there. So like it still feels like, you're gonna get away with it. That is one thing I kind of struggled with in Last Night to Kill Nazis, is because it's the end of the war and I had a finite number of Nazis. So they couldn't just keep coming through the woodwork. I had 150 Nazis to work with, and that's it. And for specific story reasons, but and you guys will see, like when you read the book, by you guys I mean you two, and then you all out there. I had to play with all these conventions and things, and like one of the things I'm really proud of is mixing them with the tropes of the vampire story. So the uh you know perfectly lining up that the person who betrays them in the middle of the mission is there at exactly the right time for the sun going down for the vampire to get their first feed. I put some work into matching up the genres here. So just want everyone to know, like, I thought very hard about the nuts and bolts and the pieces that make up a World War II mission movie / book. So, and I really do like that Where Eagles Dare has all those things, even if some of them could have been cut, a few of them could have been cut. They didn't need to be captured so many times. Um, you know, and before we get into Kelly's Heroes a little bit,
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit our overall feelings looking back on Where Eagles Dare. Where does it stack up, do you think? Personally, I think it is numero uno mission movie, with Force 10 being my number 2. But even how do you feel on overall on Where Eagles Dare?
It to me, it's almost like a cult classic, honestly. You have the fact that the gaming industry owes a lot to it. You have the fact that Iron Maiden has a song about it. Misfits do as well. Um, and one other thing that I noticed, and before we jump to the next one, is did you notice the number of the guys in the squad in the movie?
No, I did not.
No.
No.
It's 7. It's always 7, which is kind of odd because I caught myself the other night watching The Mandalorian, and it was that mission where they were going to retrieve the kid from the eagle again.
Yeah.
Right.
There was 7 Mandalorians as well.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a random thing. I just started counting them. Like, I wonder if that was done on purpose, or was it just like one of those things? It's just like, well, we just got a few guys. Because you do have 7 samurais and Magnificent Seven, and that number just kind of keeps on repeating. It's like a magic number for the
Yeah.
mission movies.
Now I'm looking up the lyrics to Where Eagles Dare by the Misfits, because obviously that's the first time I heard the title.
Mm-hmm.
Was well, no,
What?
maybe I've seen the movie first, but
Which
I don't.
Iron Maiden song is
Well,
based
I'm
on it?
gonna look at
We're,
that one in a second, but
we're
first the
Eagles there.
Misfits,
We were okay.
Yeah.
because I'm not sure that this was actually inspired by the movie, but because I'm looking
I
at
mean,
it, I
it
don't
is
see
it is the
anything.
Misfits though.
It is the Misfits. I mean, we got your omelet of disease awaits your noontime meal. Her mouth of germicide seducing all your. That has nothing to do with this movie. I mean,
You probably just use a title. Now,
I
Iron
ain't
Maiden
no
song though.
goddamn. Because I thought for a second, well, you know,
Oh, this is totally influenced by the movie, the Iron Maiden one.
all right,
Oh yeah,
hit
they,
us,
they
Dino.
actually
Tell
have
us some of the lyrics.
It's snowing outside, the rumbling sound of engines roar in the night. The mission is near, the confident men are waiting to drop from the sky.
Oh yeah.
The
Yeah.
song actually starts with the broadsword calling Danny Boy.
Oh, really? Oh,
The
yeah,
actual
the clip. Yeah.
soundbite from the movie. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah.
That is funny.
So point to Iron Maiden, negative point to Misfits for just
There we go.
randomly using that. Yeah, I mean, not that I don't like Where Eagles Dare is a great Misfits song. I'm not talking shit, but
Right.
I just, you know, here,
And yeah.
yeah.
And honestly, you wouldn't have that entire, not just World War II squad based movies, but you probably wouldn't have Predator without it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
probably with a lot of these movies are the template
Yeah.
for that same sort of thing.
yeah, this is like an 80s action movie before 80s action movies. I
Right.
mean, they would have cut a lot of shit in the 80s. They would have just,
Yeah. Substitute the alcohol for cocaine.
Yeah.
yeah.
And you would have a 20-minute intro to show how badass they are, like a first little side mission.
Yeah, right.
And then they would start training. They'd have to train for
There's
it.
a couple of montages.
Montage, yeah.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I think our 80s version, I can see it, but how we do it now, I mean, we could talk about that a little bit later. Or one of the things we talked about last time was imagining a third Navarone book. So maybe we'll sequelize these movies a little bit, come up with something. But Dino, overall, like, where do you think Where Eagles Dare fits in with the mission movie?
For me, it had the most intrigue because of the lie of the mission itself.
Right.
I know Navarone does that too, but this one seemed to have it in multiple layers. It doesn't have the briskness of like a Great Escape or some of these other movies, but it does. It did keep me intrigued and interested, to the point where I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting helicopter. Let me look it up." The one that they land at the castle. And it's actually an American Bell 47G, introduced in 1946, used in the Korean War. So it's not even of the era. But I let it slide just because it was just such a unique setting too.
It was. It was really a Hummer movie setting.
Yeah, and you did get some. At least I got some sense of like, movies with incredible heights freak me out. My palms start to sweat.
Yep.
The only thing, we got to climb ropes. I'm like, damn, no thanks. And they just kept like carrying this like thin little coil of rope that just kept throwing out windows, and everyone was just, let's just rappel. And
one of my favorite moments in the movie is when the one captured Nazi, they're like, climb, go down.
Yeah.
They start setting him down to make it,
Yeah, he's bait.
A bait, yeah.
Yeah. That was great. That was a great, like, because that guy's probably thinking, like, oh, wait, this is the only way I'm going to get out.
Well,
so he's going to keep going. Right? Yeah. That was some great stuff.
One thing that I want to mention is, have any of you seen, it's an 80s British sitcom called Allo Allo?
No.
Called what?
Allo Allo.
No.
So it's a World War II sitcom set in Nazi-occupied France, and one of the funniest things in that sitcom was the fact that they all spoke English with like heavy French accent, except for the British double agent who was speaking English with heavy British accent, pretending that it's a heavy French accent. Which, when I was watching the movie last night, and the first time they actually show in the village, they say like one German word and then immediately just switch to English.
Yeah.
And that to me was
that's, if I was going to remake this movie, I would go hardcore with reality and have everybody speaking German.
Yeah.
I would make the actors learn German for
German actors.
So when I watched it last night, I just started laughing because I'm like, oh, okay, now I see where Allo got it, because he was such a transition. Like, oh yeah, halt, and then it's like, oh yeah, here's my papers.
It wasn't just the accents too that were funny in Where Eagles Dare. It's the fact that they were like at that cafe surrounded by not just soldiers but like SS like officers, and they're blatantly discussing the mission parameters out loud.
Well, and it's funny too because they set up the idea like you're chosen for this mission partially because you're all fluent in German, but then
Yeah.
we're just gonna film the movie in English, and
Yeah.
you're just supposed to believe that it's in
Right.
German, which is fine, I guess.
Yeah.
But like for me, like I would love to see like a realistic
Yeah.
version of it, and
For sure.
you know,
The
see,
the hunt for Red October did it the best in terms of transitioning from they start speaking in Russian and then there's a close up of the camera goes close to someone reading something
Mhm.
and they're reading it in Russian and then at some point they start reading it in English and then the camera just pulls back and after that everyone speaks English and it's just implied that they're speaking Russian still.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's actually-
This is the thing. I can't. This is a nitpick, but I can't. If you're gonna have a Russian played with a giant, thick Scottish accent, I can't do it. I can't do it. Is the thing will take me out of every movie. Like, and that's the thing is like I don't like. I actually like the Black Widow movie, but it like drives me nuts that then they kind of came up with an excuse for it. But it's like you have two actors who are committed to doing the Russian voices, supposed to be in the same family, and then you have one who's not even trying. Then it's
Right.
like it makes it worse.
Mhm.
Almost like and that's for me. That's a huge pet peeve. I
Yeah.
cannot take that. Like, you know, if you're supposed to be Irish, but you have like, you know, if you're out there like, hey, what are you doing? You know,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Like,
It was like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Costner just losing his English accent about 10
Oh
minutes
yeah.
in.
right.
Which they made fun of Men in Tights.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. So, yeah, and my fine, yeah, I guess we can move on to Kelly's Heroes.
Yeah.
And this was
Yeah.
interesting for me because, I picked this I started looking up some because I wanted to have a few that I hadn't seen before. And but this was one I knew nothing about. Had either of you guys, starting with Even, had you seen this before?
No, I've heard about it, but honestly, like I heard about it and thought it was a show and not a movie.
Ah,
Yeah, I initially confused it with Hogan's Heroes too.
There you go. Yep.
right. Well, and you know, I wasn't prepared for what a comedy it was. Like how, I mean, not entirely, but you know, and there is some funny backstory with some of that too. But you know, I wasn't prepared for. I guess I should have known when I saw that Don Rickles was in it.
That's a tip off.
That should be
Yeah.
a tip off, you know. And although Telly Savalas has been in serious roles, although man, he did not stop yelling this whole movie.
Right.
Like, 'cause I watched Kelly's Heroes after Carrie went to sleep, and I had to keep turning it down every time Telly Savalas started talking because I was like, he was louder than the
Him and
machine
Carol
gun.
O'Connor.
Yeah, no, that was something. Yeah, Archie Bunker being in
Archie
this
Bunker was and
Yeah,
Kojak
that-
were loud.
yeah. So we should explain what this movie is about.
Yeah.
Kelly's Heroes, for if you have not seen it, Clint Eastwood vehicle. And it was originally supposed to be directed by Don Siegel, as I mentioned earlier, who would go on to direct Clint Eastwood many times, including Dirty Harry. And God, Don Siegel did a lot of big movies. You
He
know,
also
Quentin
do
Tarantino.
Escape from Alcatraz.
He did Escape from Alcatraz. He was a journeyman director, just directed a lot of movies over the 60s and 70s. And I know Quentin Tarantino has talked on his podcast quite a bit about Don Siegel and like what his style, like he has a style, he brings a certain gravitas to directing movies. And I know he was supposed to do this, and then at the last minute, he couldn't finish the movie he was doing before this in time. And so the director of Where Eagles Dare stepped in, much to the chagrin of Clint Eastwood, who tried to back out of the movie, but he was the star of the movie. So no Clint Eastwood, no movie. And now that being said, there's a huge cast. So let's go through the cast. We've done this a little bit already. Don Rickles has a small role. Telly Savalas has a very big role. I would say the number 2 role in the movie.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Carol O'Connor. We've got a young Harry Dean Stanton.
He was 44 when he did this. He wasn't that young.
That's young for him.
Yeah.
It's young for him.
I looked that up. He was 44.
He was born as a 30-year-old
as a private.
In 1970, he was 44 already.
And he was credited as, I can't remember, it was Harry Stanton or Dean Stanton, but not the Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah. But pre-Star, pre-Repo Band, pre all of it. Yeah, so Harry Dean Stanton, we had, there's some others. Who am I missing?
Donald Sutherland.
Donald Sutherland is a big one.
Donald Sutherland.
He was something else in this movie.
He was.
Gavin McLeod, the captain of the Love Boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
He was one of the other tank guys. He was almost unrecognizable, Gavin McLeod. So it would be easy if you missed him. I was looking for him because I saw his name in the credits. I'm like, hey, where's Captain Stubing? Of course, I think of him as from Mary Tyler Moore Show, but nonetheless, quite a cast and quite a comedic cast. And it's not to say that this movie doesn't have its heavy moments, because it does. And one of the interesting things about this movie is, well, first of all, my first thought was, oh, I see now what Three Kings was a kind of a modern. Three Kings was kind of a modern version of this same story. It is based on a true story from World War II. The group of soldiers who heisted a Nazi bank on their way out. How much of it is true and not true, I'm not sure. I just know that it's based on a true story.
Well, it's been classified, so for the longest time, nobody really knew how much was stolen. I think it didn't come out until like 1997. When they finally found the last 2 gold bars. They were still in Germany, of all places.
Yeah. Like a lot of heist movies, it's all a lot of work for not a lot of reward, because of just everything they had to go through. So the thing about Kelly's Heroes that I think is kind of neat is that there is this kind of not anti-wars per se, but there's an anti-establishment vibe to Kelly's Heroes that's kind of like, well, look how stupid all this is, right?
Well, it felt like it was watching a Vietnam movie filmed during World War, or set in World War II.
Right. When in 1970, you're at the height of Vietnam, so I'm sure that was not lost on the audience. So certainly I felt the same way. Yeah, it had this really interesting feel where it didn't feel like, because most World War II movies are very gung-ho because it's about, and look, we're all about killing Nazis around here. I obviously wrote this frickin' book, so we're fine with that. But the thing about it is that a lot of the World War II movies don't even question like the idea of war itself. And so this one had like an interesting vibe for it, and it was something I was not prepared for when I turned it on.
What's really interesting is actually how close to truth and behavior, human behavior, especially when you're just a grunt and not like a special squad guy. As someone who's been through boot camp and served the army, that's what it is like. It's like the first chance you get to just go somewhere and lay down and take everything off and just be like, I'm not bothering with anything. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
So for me, watching it for the first time, I was just like, it's a comedy. At least it starts off kind of like a comedy, but a lot of that stuff actually does happen. So I actually quite enjoy that, especially the mortar guy that misses. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I love the idea, like the whole movie starts off with them just getting fucking bombed to shit by
Which
their
is
own
also
forces.
which is
Yeah,
also a Vietnam sort of conceit, the whole friendly fire.
Yeah, yeah, and
yeah.
it
You know,
happens.
yeah, I mean, it
Like,
happens in all wars, but specifically
Mhm.
that.
yeah, and so this idea that they're just like under this crazy bombardment, and they've got this one Nazi in the beginning, and he tells them like, where there's this bank that has this money, and Clint Eastwood's character is the one who hashes the plan. So it's funny because Kelly's heroes, he's not even the ranking officer, he's just the one that has the plan, which is one of the things that is kind of ironic about the title, and the whole thing is really Telly Savalas's character is the ranking
Mhm.
officer on the scene, right? But it's not his plan. And I do kind of like how once they kind of get going, they the whole scene with the landmines, like this
Mhm.
this is where the movie gets poignant for a bit, because
Yeah.
like
Yep.
they lose people.
Mhm.
They and it was interesting too when the first landmine went off, and they all and Telly Savalas's character said,
Who
who
got
got
Yeah.
blew up, or
Yeah.
like,
no? Who who bought out or something like that?
yeah,
Yeah.
who bought it,
Who bought it?
Yeah, who
Yeah.
bought it? Yep, yep.
yeah,
Very glib.
Yes.
yeah. And that whole which is counterbalanced with when they finally kill all the Nazis, and then they just stand and look at the field like shit,
Yeah.
you know, which is great. And then you have, I don't know what the hell is going on with Oddball and the tanks.
I love that they start playing music that wasn't written yet,
Yeah,
but through the tank speakers, and it's not just music, non-diegetic music, off screen. It was literally music they're playing through their tank speakers on screen. That's 25 years from being written.
right. So there was a lot going on there. Now, like, we know that in Vietnam that happened a lot. I don't know how much that happened in World War II, because Vietnam, we had entire Black Panther like bases of defectors who left the U.S. Army. And this is a thing I know existed, but I don't know how much that happened in World War II. How much there would have been people like Oddball, but that whole thing was hilarious. Um, and but he was all about the money, and although he kind of ruined it by getting the people from the bridge involved, and you know
Yeah.
notifying,
Running
getting
too many
Archie
cooks in
Bunker
the
onto
kitchen.
yeah. And it is interesting to see Carol O'Connor playing anyone other than Archie Bunker, because you just kind of think of him as Archie Bunker because he played so few roles like beyond that. So
Mhm.
Yep.
towards the end of his life, and he didn't really need to, but that was interesting. And yeah, so, and then once you get into the whole thing of like where like they actually convince the whole scene where they can convince the Nazi tank when they walk up, and that's great because they have like they play the music from The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, like
Yeah.
kind of
Yep.
redone. And they had this showdown where they walk up to the tank is great.
Is Wild Bunch through and
Yeah,
through.
it is. Like the three of them walk right up to the tank and say, like, "Come on, buddy, what are we doing?" You know.
Mhm.
And I like how they do the reveal of just showing the door get blown off, and
Yeah,
the
that was
Nazis,
great.
Yeah.
yeah, the
Mhm.
Nazis and the Americans like work together to steal the money and
I
take.
love the guy's face expression because his eyes just got real big at that moment when they tell him how much money's there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they switch to the door
They
and
they
oh,
translated it to Deutschmarks.
yeah, yeah.
Um, One thing that I think, based on, because I had to do a lot of research on the end of the war, for my book, since my book takes place on the last night of the official war. So I had to do a lot of research into that, and it is true that in southern Germany and huge swaths of Germany, they had no idea who was controlling what for weeks. So there were weeks where Hitler's army was just basically deserting, and because they weren't even getting food. So because Hitler was in the bunker with very little ability to actually help his people. So one thing that was interesting is this idea that the tank would be out there. I part of my don't knowing the research that I knew, I was kind of wanting to see them be like super hungry and like come out of the tank and be like, do you have food? Which would have been cool, but I think the point is made generally anyways. But this idea that, the German soldiers already basically knew they were toast for weeks. That's why they were deserting. So long before Hitler shot himself and Goebbels drafted the surrender before he killed himself, they knew, and everybody was abandoning and jumping ship. And so I think if you remade this movie today, doing a little bit more of the chaos, the politics of the war zone would be interesting.
Yeah.
Because the one thing that I kind of was like, yeah. So the scene with the landmines when the Nazis all show up, like they were, first of all, very well fed, and they were very committed to the mission still, and that I found a little bit unbelievable. And it would have been a little bit more interesting if they had them basically like not give a shit, or like them get ready for a battle, and then the Nazis just like, I don't even care.
Maybe I missed it, but did they say that this took place towards the end of the war? Kelly's Heroes, I mean.
Yeah, it's kind of implied that the war is ending.
Okay.
And part of the idea of the bombing, like where they just keep bombing shit, is that they've taken parts of Germany that the other hands of the military don't even know they've taken it.
Yeah.
Because the soldiers are just abandoning. They're just like, we're out of here. So then the US forces would go in and be like, okay, we got it. But then the artillery would start bombing, and that happened all the time. Like they would just be like, and then they would have to be like, hey, we've already got this. You do not have to bomb this. So that's why I knew it was the end of the war, because that's the way that it kind of went down. Yeah. So yeah. So anyways, it's interesting stuff. Kelly's Heroes, very interesting movie. Overall, even this is your first time seeing this, I take it?
Yes. I actually enjoyed it. It threw me off at the beginning, because if you look at the beginning of Where Eagles Dare and the soundtrack and the music, and then how Kelly's Hero starts, it's like a totally different vibe.
Yeah.
With the opening song. But once you got going, and especially once they hit the minefield thing, that it flips around a little bit. And then you're just kind of like, oh, okay, I see. We're not just in it for the laughs. It's like people are actually going to die.
Yeah.
And then it kind of ramps up the intensity. And I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I did too. I had never, first time watch. So Dino?
Same thing. As soon as I got over the fact that they were using flower power music to start a World War II film.
Right.
And then I started to buy into, maybe I'm giving it too much credit, but I started to buy into the idea that this may have been one of the first sort of weirdly revisionist movies about World War II, using a lot of the tropes of Vietnam, like the blasting the music on the tank as a kind of psyops thing. The music, the hippies, for crying out loud, like were there communes of hippies in the middle of World War II? I don't know. I'm guessing probably not. And so the fact that they mock Carol O'Connor's general is clearly being satirized as a power warmongering, power hungry, like he wants to pin medals on everybody because at least they're still fighting. So I maybe I'm giving it more credit than it deserves, but I felt like this was like, oh, here's an attempt at sort of being a little revisionist with World War II, being funny with it, not to the extent that like Dr. Strangelove was blatantly being satirical, but getting their jabs in, and I ended up totally enjoying it.
Yeah, I really liked it. I think where you get into the mission stuff, you have like the landmine scene. You have the scene with where they're going into the village and they have to use the bell. And I love when Don Rickles goes up and he's like, "Enough of the bell!"
Yeah.
You know, like, they already know we're here. Why are you still ringing the bell? You know, very funny. You know, Don Rickles, I think, was pretty great at it. Tully Savalas was very good.
Yeah.
And Donald Sutherland, I don't know what the hell he was doing.
I think just told do what you want, dude.
I read
Pretty
an
much.
interesting
Pretty
trivia
much.
fact about this movie is that Donald Sutherland, his wife, the mother of Kiefer Sutherland, his wife got arrested for buying hand grenades for Black Panthers. Well, Donald Sutherland was on the set of this movie. Do you know why she got caught?
Fantastic. No.
Do you know why she got caught? She wrote a check. And when Donald Sutherland found out that she wrote a check, Clint Eastwood, he started cracking up. And then Clint Eastwood gave him a pat on the shoulder and said, "I'm sorry, buddy." Donald Sutherland also got pneumonia and almost died on the set of this movie.
Oh wow.
So
Wow. Filmed in
Yeah.
Yugoslavia, as they were very
Yeah,
quick
it's
to point out in the opening
interesting.
credit. Yeah.
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 So
Talk to us
In
about
the same
Yugoslavia
font
here, but-
used in Where Eagles Dare.
yeah, so here's the thing. The budget of Where Eagles Dare was like 6-7 million. The budget of Kelly's Heroes 4 million. Yugoslav war movies at the time were like budgets of up to $12 million. And the way they were doing that is, Tito was still alive, and he would have like 50, 60 different companies from the country just pitching money to sponsor movies. So they were operating with these like insane budgets, and Hollywood took notice. A couple of years later, you had Richard Burton playing in a movie called Battle of Sutjeska, and he was playing Tito. They were just like randomly getting Orson Welles coming over. Franco Nero was there shooting all these World War II. And the thing is, they had the equipment, right? They didn't have to make the equipment. It was there. A lot of, at the time, Yugoslav army equipment was just stuff that was still left over from World War II. Some of it Allied, some of it German. And, you had the locations, you had the technology, and they were just using the real army as extras. It's like,
Well, it's kind of like how after Katrina, like everyone filmed their end of the world movies in New Orleans. Like,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Like after that, like for like 6 years, it was like, "Hey, we've got a bunch of destruction. Come film your end of the world movie here."
Exactly. Yeah. So what was really funny is that I could tell part of it was shot in like northern Serbia, where I'm from, like half an hour from my house, the minefields and stuff, because it's all flatlands. And then the other half was shot in Croatia, and it's all those like stone buildings, but they were switching back and forth nonstop, trying to kind of show it as the same place. And I'm like, this is so odd, because they had to have been shooting like scenes here and there, and you can tell that they were not shot in order. It was just like, oh, we'll shoot this one here, and then just switching back and forth. Like here they are with the tank in a field, it's all flat, and the next thing you know, it's like stone buildings in the middle of the village, and that's like northern Croatia. So it was just kind of interesting to see that back and forth between the scenes and how they shot it. But yeah, that was just like standard in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, and I know it's strange too, because like if we watch movies from, for example, you watch a movie from LA from the late 60s, you could still see, you're like, "Oh yeah, they're in Pasadena," and you can see parts, So it had to be weird watching these two movies and see like, oh, they were definitely filmed.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
you
sure
recognize the
parts.
landscape too, like, because it's all flat, right? So like I remember back home, it's like Midwest.
I'm in LA. So any TV show I see that's filmed out here, they do the same thing. They'll literally shoot something that I go, I know exactly what street that is in Pasadena. And then 5 minutes later, they're in Malibu. And it's like, no, you're not going to be there 5 minutes later.
Well, the ultimate example, our neighborhood here in San Diego, Ocean Beach, the TV show Terriers treats Ocean Beach as like 6 blocks wide, and they treat it like it's its own city. in interiors, and like there's even like OBPD and stuff like that interiors, and like it's like one tiny neighborhood, hippie surf town neighborhood of San Diego. It always cracks me up. But yeah, so I mean, it had to be, yeah. That I definitely was thinking of you when I saw like all the stuff about it filming in
Yeah.
Yugoslavia. So and so, well, the part of Yugoslavia that you come from, Serbia, like is a very specific region, though, right? Like you guys are lowland mountains, right? Or am I?
Well, it's gonna stretch as the northern Serbia where I'm from. It used to be pretty much at one point it was like a giant lake or a sea, and then just dried out, and it's just completely flat. And then as you start going down south, then you get into the mountains and stuff. But that entire area, like 200-300 miles, is just like nothing but farmlands.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're we talked a lot about this in the last episode, because that region is was so important to World War II, but and Alistair McLean wrote about it a lot, but a lot of other World War II movies do not address what happened with the partisans and like the fighting in that region. Just like there's not a lot about like the North African fighting
Yeah.
in World War II movies as well. Or the Russian front for American audiences. We just
Yeah, right.
hear about it.
Yeah.
Well, and also the Russian front is just a lot of people starving. Doesn't make for great movies.
Yeah.
But it here or there. But anyways, so here's the thing. Do we think Kelly's Heroes is a movie that could be updated, or would we not want to mess with it? I don't think we'd want to mess with it, because I think the characters are so specific to the performances is really fun.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd want to mess with it. Just leave it as. But if you did,
the irony of it being compared to Three Kings, which is the movie that was influenced by this, or they got their influence off this movie, would be kind of funny.
Yeah, and Three Kings is an interesting movie because it was all filmed in Arizona, which is just crazy. Which boggles my mind. But one of the things about Three Kings is that they were able to keep it down to like just a couple characters, and it doesn't have like the scope that Kelly's Heroes does. But yeah, Three Kings, I'm due for a rewatch of Three Kings. That's a great movie. Especially in the light of watching this. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a fun one. So we'll definitely have to what I'm gonna have everybody back on for one episode when we're gonna rank them in the end. We'll see how we do. Now we're gonna flip back to the other guys for the next episode. I'm not sure what it is. I'm gonna have my no hair crew back at some point, but before we go on this episode, let's talk a little bit about like can we imagine doing a sequel to either of these with these characters? I think it would be interesting. I don't know if I would do. Well, you never know. Richard Burton's character. There's you could definitely do more stories with him towards the end of the war, like exposing spies.
Yeah.
And doing that. We talked last time that an Alistair McLean or a Mallory novel set in Istanbul, where OSS was headquartered, with like kind of a city of spies thing, would be really interesting. You could cross over. You could do a crossover with Mallory from Guns and Richard Burton's character, and that trying to suss out. Suss out a spy in Istanbul would be great. I would watch the shit out of that.
I think that would be the way to go.
Yeah. And then with Kelly's Hero, you can just do something about, instead of following the characters, but you follow the trail of gold, and you shoot it like 20, 30 years later, and somebody starts like killing them off one by one, because they all have some sort of money, right? And what they did with it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like they're starting to die, and it's like, well, who's doing it and why? And then you kind of start following the trail of gold.
You got the neo-Nazis who want their money back.
There you go.
That was Granddad's money, man.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you actually bring back the Nazi guy and have him like star with Clint Eastwood.
Oh yeah, the Nazi tank guy. Like,
Yeah,
like the two of them have to team up to try
Yep.
and figure
Yeah,
out
right.
Yep.
trying to get the money back.
Mhm.
Can you imagine Clint's character? Like, oh, I don't know, guy. Yeah,
And I'm
that
curious
would
to
be
find out if that
interesting.
guy's still alive.
Excuse me. Well, yeah, no, there's a story there too. That's kind of a funny one. All
Yeah.
right. I'll allow it. I'll allow it. I think of the two, I want to see the one in Istanbul. I want to see
Yeah,
yeah,
Oh yeah.
Mallory from
yeah.
Guns.
That has more legs to it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the one that we would we'll have to set up our writers room for. So on that note, well, tell the folks out there. So well, before we get into that, some World War II films. Now you mentioned Das Boot and Bridge on the River Kwai. Even I know there's a few that you really wanted to possibly watch in the future. Like, what are some ones you want to
So
put
one
listeners
movie
on?
that I think everybody should watch, and it's from that Yugoslav school of movies, but it's actually for the longest time was the most watched World War II movie ever because it was hugely popular in China to the point that it actually had beer named after it and like streets and they were naming children after it. And the movie's called Walter Defends Sarajevo. And
Okay.
it's a similar thing. It's kind of like a spy movie where the Nazis are trying to capture this guy who's some sort of a leader of resistance, but they know nothing about him other than his code name Walter. And the entire movie they don't really like explain who the guy is. So you just have this like resistance fighters that are fighting Nazis, and then once the things start going down, the body count just kind of goes up in the hundreds.
Nice.
All right. Well,
It's on YouTube for free with subtitles. So
well, you
that's
know
all I'm
what?
gonna say.
We have quite a while before last night comes out, so we'll probably get to it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, folks, that there's a good chance that one of the next two is going to be Three Graves to Cairo, uh, the Billy Wilder,
Mhm.
which was made while the war was still going
Going,
on.
yeah.
So, and a little bit speculative about the ending, I believe, but I've never seen it. So it's one that's been, it's like very high on my list of World War II movies that I've been meaning to watch for a while. So that might be in the next one. And
I'm all for watching ones I haven't seen. So
yeah.
For sure.
So, well, here's the thing, guys. We will, we will see each other again here on this panel. I'm revolving, obviously, with the other crew, but as you guys know, we're discussing it online. So if you guys want to follow along and watch with the ones that even you know that you're not on the podcast with, of course you can do that. And folks at home, you can watch along with us. And this is another opportunity for me to say the last night to kill Nazis. And yeah, I'm really excited that you know we're able to talk about the subject. Dino, tell the folks how they can find you and find your work.
well, Dino Parenti on all the platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And I've got stories and all kinds of little I have a collection called Dead Reckoning and Other Stories, which you can get on Amazon. That's kind of my complete book length work. And at this point I've just got a bunch of stories and novellas out for consideration. So knock on wood.
All right. Even tell the folks how they can find you and they can find you writing about what food you're cooking and
That's in the plans, though. I can't really announce it yet, but there's a plans for sort of a weird cookbook.
oh, is there? Okay.
Nice.
Yep, yep,
Uh,
yep. But other than that, yeah, just a collection, just an anthology just came out about urban legends called "A Walk in a City of Shadows." One of my stories is in it. And then recently, I was in Inner Zone, Innocent Digital, actually.
I
The
love that
story was,
story. That was great.
yeah,
Yeah, the one you're about to tell the folks
yeah,
about.
yeah. The story is called titled "Roots Will Dry Out in the End," and it's kind of funny. It was originally written for Gabino for his Christmas holiday Hallmark anthology, and I could not write it to be funny. And he sent me the best rejection ever, just saying if this was a serious anthology, I would buy this story right away. But it just doesn't fit the funny thing. So I just kind of shopped it around a little bit, and Interzone picked it up, and it's kind of like a dark holiday Christmas story. And you read it, so you know.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great story. Even is an extremely talented writer, and I want a novel length work very soon, sir.
Yes.
At the same time, like I know there's only so many. There's a lot of basketball to watch before the end of the
Yes.
year. So
I'm ready for the playoffs.
yes, yes. I know, and oh, please, Blazers, don't suck next year. It's really hard on me. Come
Yeah.
on. All right. So on that note, guys, stick around. I have a surprise for you. And then but as far as listeners, stay posted for more in this series. We're going to have cool stuff coming down the pike. And and I did not promote the fact that I went to the Ray Bradbury Center in Indianapolis, and I'm going to have the director of the current the professor who runs the Ray Bradbury Center in Indianapolis, and everyone should go there because they recreated his office in the basement in Indianapolis, and they use photos to make sure like the books are in the same like completely unorganized fashion that they were. And Ray Bradbury's desk where he sat and wrote Martian Chronicles, Something Wicked This Way Comes, October Country, where he painted the Halloween tree and the painting of the Halloween tree are all there. And it doesn't cost anything. You just have to request a tour when they're able to give you one. So it doesn't cost anything. They just want to be able to show off their stuff. So it's just matching up your schedule with your visit. And look, if people want to do an Indianapolis nerd trip, the Lilly Library Archives in Bloomington is amazing. I held a first edition of Frankenstein when I was there. They have the Ian Fleming papers, they have the Anthony Boucher papers, they have a giant collection of sci-fi pulps, and the Kurt Vonnegut Museum's in Indianapolis. The Ray Bradbury Center is there. It is WonderCon is there. So when you go to WonderCon, go do these nerdy other things. So I just want to put that out there. And on that note, stay frosty, everybody, and we'll be back soon for Star Trek Picard season 3.